What you're listening to now is a song that's featured in a documentary about a 1977 integral yoga retreat. The documentary is called Truth is One, Paths Are Many, and the song has the same name. My name is Brianna Patton, and this is Surviving Satchidananda, the show where we talk about everything the leadership at Yogaville doesn't want us to talk about. Today's episode is pretty monumental because this is the first time a man has come on a public forum and stated that they were assaulted when they were a minor and under the care of the Integral Yoga Institute. Maxim Kramer got involved in integral yoga when he was just 15, and he moved into the New York Institute when he was still a minor. Now he's a psychologist, and he specializes both in the psychology of sex offenders and cult victims. He was involved in integral yoga from a very young age and studied under Swami Satchidananda, but now that he has a PhD in psychology, he brings a broader academic perspective to not only his experience, but the experience of people like the ones who have been featured on this show. I want to remind you that the goal of this program is to amplify voices and stories that have historically been silenced. And today's guest was silenced by the guru, Swami Satchidananda himself. These stories will not be hidden any longer. Thanks for listening. Maxim, thanks for coming to talk to me today. I'm grateful that you're going to share your story about integral yoga with us.
Sure thing.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you got introduced to integral yoga? How old were you? What was going on in your life when you were introduced to integral yoga?
I was 15 and I was seeking a spiritual teacher, really, and knew about Swamiji, which is what we call Swami Satchidananda, from an article in the New York Times that came out in 1967. It was in my high school class. I saw it on the bulletin board. It was about Hinduism in New York City. And it had a picture of some of the Swamis that were in New York at the time, including Swami Satchidananda. Somewhere around May of 68, I found out that Swami Satchidananda would be speaking on Friday night. And I went down to the Universalist Church in the basement. There was a satsang every week at 8 o'clock and met him after the talk. And I was enthralled and experienced a lot of Shaktipat, or whatever you want to call that energy, when I met him one-to-one. It was very powerful. And I was in like Flynn, as we used to say, and got very involved in the IYI, 500 West End Avenue ashram or center. And I was initiated into mantra yoga by Swamiji. And then I just used to go to the IYI every weekend and volunteered as a receptionist. I was probably a junior or sophomore in high school. And for the 2 years, I was very involved. I was sleeping over there every weekend, living about an hour away and just taking the train in. And then I finished high school. I was still 17, actually, and then moved in.
So it sounds like you were spiritually inclined and curious. I'm wondering, was there any issues that you were dealing with at the time that you were looking to solve? Because a lot of people, including myself, first got into it. They were looking for some sort of mental health or human connection. Was that the case for you, or did you just see something in your classroom and decide that you were going to try it out?
Well, I had been studying Hinduism and religion in general for a while. So I was already spiritually ripe and had read Autobiography of a Yogi, so I wasn't having any stress as a kid. It was for a good year and a half. It was my obsession. It just came to an extreme, and I was ready to become a monk, which is what I told Swami when I met him. I was just at a crescendo of spirituality, and it lasted for a few years, but I was also a teenager. So eventually I realized I needed to grow as a human being, as a kid, as a young man.
You were 15 when you started getting involved. Was there anything your parents had to sign for you to be a minor and involved in the organization back then?
No, I would always call them and let them know when I was sleeping over. I'd sleep over Friday night and volunteer the next day. I'd come in from high school, and as long as they knew where I was, they didn't give me much trouble about that.
And you started sleeping over when you were 15?
16. I turned 16 in August, and I probably started volunteering around that time. I loved the people. This was the hippie time, and most everyone was in their 20s, and I was kind of the kid, and I had my head in a book a lot of the time.
What was Swami Satchidananda's reaction when you said you wanted to be a monk?
I remember him patting me, and it just encouraged me, not verbally. It really wasn't what he said that was important, just his presence that was so powerful. He just had an intense presence, so if you looked into his eyes or whatever, you could sometimes feel he was looking very deeply, and you felt a deep connection.
You mentioned to me in a conversation at one time at a satsang where Swami Satchidananda was speaking that he kissed a woman. Can you explain that experience that you had?
We used to hang out after the talk, and people would come to greet him and meet him. And once it was very strange. This attractive young lady, maybe 20 or so, came to meet him, and I saw him kiss her in a lip-to-lip kiss in a prolonged way. And it looked very bizarre. It looked so strange. It was so unusual to see that. And he even kind of embraced her in this romantic way. And she just looked dumbfounded. And I never saw the girl again. Wasn't a disciple or anything.
So you think that was her first time there?
That's my impression was. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what to think of it. I thought he must be a really high teacher who can do that kind of intimacy and be as spiritual as he was.
In the early 1970s, there was a scandal that happened in the integral yoga community where some women came forward and said that they were assaulted by Swami Satchidananda or had sexual relationships with him. Were you around when that happened, or did you pick up on any other inappropriate relationships that he was having?
I found out about that secondhand, and then it was written up in the Village Voice article. It kind of surprised me, and I know who it was. It was Sheila, who was his secretary, or whatever you call the person that was always with him. It was pretty disturbing to hear that because she was married to a gentleman named Bhaskar who ran the institute, basically. Reading that article, I realized it wasn't just her. It was other women. We noticed that Swamiji liked to have pretty women around him. That was something that was another peculiarity because his guru, Swami Shivananda, was very conservative and wrote extensively about the necessity of practitioners to stay away from the opposite sex and be very on guard against sexual arousal. It's a big part of Swami Shivananda's teaching. And it seemed like Swamiji skirted that rule. He had no problem hugging women, hugging girls, and being close physically. So he did not embody the conservatism that his guru stressed so much.
When you read that Village Voice article, were you still involved in integral yoga, or was that after you had left?
After I left in 1971. That was out in 72.
Okay.
And one of the people I kept in touch with told me about what had happened.
And you also mentioned to me that you were sexually assaulted by someone in the institute. Can you tell me what happened with that?
Well, what happened there, which kind of opened my eyes a little bit about Swamiji's character and limitations. One of the ashramites who I was friends with had fallen in love with me probably when I was about 17. And he didn't say that, but it was pretty obvious he had this kind of infatuation. He was homosexual. And I kind of tolerated his Google eyes, so to speak. It didn't really faze me too much. But he was pretty well known, very dedicated to Swamiji. But I guess it got too much, and he became, I guess, sexually attracted to me to the extreme where once when I woke up, I was in a sleeping bag, and he was basically rubbing the sleeping bag over my genitals. And I was pretty shocked and appalled. And I think he got so upset that he left the institute and went on a long walk. And he probably didn't ever apologize either. And the way the story developed was that apparently he had airline tickets in his possession. And when he went on this long walk, Swamiji had tickets to go somewhere, and no one could find Janardana, that was his name, who may have had the tickets. So at some point, Swamiji called downstairs and asked to speak with me because I'd been the last person to speak with Janardana. And I told him what happened. I told him, well, this is what happened. I woke up and kind of described to him in fair detail what transpired that morning. And I kind of felt the need to be explicit. Janardana, he was probably about 28 or so, and I was 17. And Swamiji responded to all this by saying, you talk too much. I don't think I was upset by what Swamiji said. I was trying to make sense of it. And I probably thought, well, I guess I do talk too much. Maybe I'm too explicit. And I could have just told him the bare facts, that I saw him in the morning and he went off. But I thought it would be more information is better. Apparently not from Swamiji's perspective. And he didn't really address the issue at all. He didn't speak with Janardana, and that was kind of his style in general. My sense is he wasn't interested in problem solving or dealing with things like that.
When you told Swami Satchidananda about that interaction, was anyone else around?
Well, I was in the kitchen with everyone else mulling around. Swamiji lived on had an apartment on the 11th floor, and we were on the 5th. So he just called down.
So other people would have heard you explaining what happened, right?
I don't think I was particularly, quiet or anything.
Swami Satchidananda was the only person you told about this?
Yeah, it didn't occur to me to tell anyone else.
You mentioned that you had an interaction with Sharada Thompson, who we interviewed a few episodes ago, where you knew her a little bit, right?
Oh, yeah, I knew Sharada well. It was really a family. We were around each other so much. That little incident that I mentioned to you was kind of peculiar. I was living on 88th Street after I left the IYI. What happened is I stopped by the Institute. I was taking the elevator down, and Sharada, we were in the elevator, and she just kind of blurts out, I'm not mad at Swamiji. I just think of him as a boyfriend. And I was a little shocked, because I didn't even know he had relations with her. No one mentioned it. I knew about Sheila, of course, but I didn't really know who else. So it was kind of unusual, and I didn't know what to think of it other than, so she's another one who was molested or involved sexually. There was named Devi, who was very close to Swamiji. She lived in the ashram. She was older, probably in her early 40s. And she was very devoted. Swamiji would write her letters, and this was in 1970. So she was quite involved. And apparently, Janardana told me this later, that she disappeared overnight. She moved everything out and just disappeared. This was even before, I think, the article in the Village Voice came out. So I've always imagined that she must have caught someone in the act, or as, maybe Swamiji made a move on her. Something happened. She left suddenly and urgently, and someone that I know who was very involved met with her many years later, and she refused to talk about it. Mm-hmm. So something was going on, and I would also mention that Swamiji once pressed one of the disciples there that was one of the old timers, very involved, and asked her if she was having an affair repeatedly and persistently. And that really disturbed her. He just was pushing her, like, did you cheat on her husband? And I don't know why Swamiji got caught in this, how that happened, but he just got caught in this questioning. And that was disturbing. She said she lost respect for him after he did that. So God knows what was going on in Swamiji's development. It kind of surprises me that it wasn't just a phase. Even late in his career, when he was in his late 60s or 70s or something, he was still coming on to disciples. In fact, when I left Swamiji, or when I called him and I told him I was leaving, the first thing he said was, "Is it because you want girls?" Actually, the The thing that pushed me over to leave was not at all like that. Swamiji even encouraged me to get married once. He says, why don't you pick one of these girls here? He once told me that. So it's interesting that that was the first thing to come to Swami's mind was, I'm leaving because I want girlfriend or sex or whatever. I thought that was revealing, and I think he did a lot of projection. And one other thing he said I think is important, well, sometimes you have to take a few steps backwards before you go forward. So he was implying that me leaving the Institute was going backwards.
Can you tell me a little bit about your professional background and experience working with sex offenders?
Well, as a psychologist, I do various things. Do a lot of therapy and assessments and evaluations. And about 10 years ago, I began to do some work for the parole department and work with sex offenders and had a lot of training. And I was always been interested in the relationship between sexuality and spirituality, and it's still a fascinating area for me. But with the sex offender treatment, I was asked to do groups once a week and twice a week and therapy, and learned a lot about the population of people we call sex offenders, people convicted of a sex offense statute. I still do work with sex offenders occasionally. I've even worked with people who are involved in cults, so I've had a pretty wide range of populations to work with.
In your professional opinion, how would you describe the psychological profile of Swami Satchidananda?
That's a good question. We'd have to say there's some sociopathy. We all may lie from time to time or not speak truth, but you can be impervious to feeling a healthy type of guilt and conscience. And I sometimes think that Swamiji was lacking in that area. Also, his development in the area of true empathy may have had some real strong limitations. Integral yoga is supposed to be focused on developing a heart full of mercy, right? But where was the mercy when Swamiji was seducing his students? So I would say Swamiji was maldeveloped in that way. When I think about sex offending cycles of behavior and I think about Swamiji, what occurs to me is the term grooming, the idea that many sex offenders will begin a relationship with a potential victim with the aim of being able to commit a sex offense with that person, establishing a relationship that allows the victim to trust the offender. In this field, we also talk about grooming of yourself. So the sex offender often will have to make it okay for them to commit the sex offense. So it's kind of like a self-grooming. And that also is a gradual process for many people. It's a more subtle way of coping with sexual attraction to minors or whatever the sex offense might involve with, and escalate to a point where they convince themselves it's okay to commit the act. So when I think about Swami's behavior, I do think how he groomed the victims, that's one thing. But then the thought is, well, how do he groom himself? As I said, his teacher was extreme. He would write in his books, if you see a woman, imagine her innards, her guts, her blood. Imagine her in the most awful way so that your attraction to her is nullified. That was one of his strategies for helping those practicing spiritually advanced yoga to get rid of the sexual instinct. So he comes from such an extreme background, and yet he tells himself and believes that it's all right for him to pursue sexual relationships with his students undercover. Swamiji, like other gurus, find a way to convince themselves that it's okay for them to go with their impulses, even though it violates not only their vows, but it also violates the trust in the relationship and the dignity of the victim. And it's so rampant that I barely can come up with the name of a teacher that has not been accused of sexual abuse.